The house where kindness died. My name is Lorraine Whitaker, and I'm 82 years old. If you were to ask anyone in our town of Maplewood, Pennsylvania, they'd tell you I was the kindest grandmother alive. They'd say I fed hungry neighbors, stitched blankets for newborns, and gave warm pies to church raffles. They'd tell you I hugged every child who came near me, that I was a blessing to strangers. They'd nod their heads and smile as if they knew me. But no one, not a single soul, knew what really happened behind my closed doors. You see, I only ever had one grandson. His name was Ethan. Everyone thought he was my pride, my joy, the reason my old hands still baked bread and my frail legs still carried me to Sunday service. That's the story I let the world believe. The truth was far darker. For Ethan, I had no warmth. No soft words. No bread hot from the oven. Instead, I saved my sharpest insults for him. I fed him scraps while neighbors dined on roast chicken at my table. When strangers walked by, I pulled them close, kissed their cheeks, and pressed cookies into their palms. And Ethan? I left him starving in his bedroom, listening to my laughter float down the hallway like a cruel ghost. He tried to tell his mother, my daughter Marlene, but she never believed him. She'd look at my gentle eyes, the same ones that convinced the entire community I was a saint, and she'd say, "Mama would never do that. Don't lie about her." So Ethan learned silence. Years rolled on like heavy wagons, carrying with them guilt, secrets, and the growing distance between us. He grew taller. My hair grew whiter. But the house remained the same, smiling at outsiders, suffocating for Ethan. And then came the night that changed everything. It was winter, the year he turned 17. Snow lay thick on the ground, and the power had gone out across Maplewood. Our home was cold, dark, and too quiet. That was the night Ethan finally broke. I heard him from my rocking chair in the living room. His voice trembled, yet it carried power I had never heard before. He shouted, "If nobody believes me, then I'll show them. I'll show everyone what you really are, Grandma." My heart clenched, not from guilt, but from fear. Because for the first time in decades, I realized Ethan wasn't the quiet, defeated boy anymore. He was about to expose me. When I think back to my early years as a mother, I sometimes wonder where I lost myself. I was only 19 when I gave birth to my daughter, Marlene, in the spring of 1962. The world outside was bursting with promise. New music, new freedoms, new beginnings. But for me, life was already closing its fists. My husband, Gerald, was a man with quick hands and a quicker temper. By the time Marlene could walk, he was gone, leaving me with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a child who looked at me with wide, hungry eyes. I worked wherever I could, laundries, diners, the old post office on Main Street. I stitched hems for neighbors late into the night and scrubbed motel rooms in silence. My hands cracked from bleach, my back ached from bending, but I never let Marlene see me cry. I wanted her to believe her mama was strong, unbreakable. And I poured everything I had into her. Every nickel went toward her school books. Every Sunday, I pressed her little dresses clean so she wouldn't look poor sitting in the church pews. I skipped meals so she could eat. I saved pennies in a mason jar, whispering prayers over it like it was holy water, prayers that one day she'd have more than I ever did. Marlene grew up believing the world revolved around her. And maybe, in a way, it did. She had the smile of an angel and the charm of a movie star. Teachers adored her. Boys followed her like shadows. By the time she turned 17, she was the most beautiful girl in Maplewood, and I was the tired, invisible mother who had built her world from dust. But something changed in her around that time. She began to look at me not with gratitude, but with embarrassment. My patched skirts and rough hands seemed to shame her. When her friends visited, she spoke to me like I was her servant. When I tried to hug her, she stiffened. And when I asked for a little kindness, a word, a smile, she rolled her eyes as if I were an old fool begging for scraps. I told myself it was just the cruelty of teenage years, that she'd come back to me once she was older. I clung to hope the way drowning people cling to driftwood. But the first real crack appeared the night she told me she was leaving. She was 18, standing at the bottom of our staircase with her suitcase already packed. I was in my apron, hands covered in flour from the bread I had just baked for her. "Mama," she said, not looking me in the eyes, "I'm moving in with Tom." Tom. A boy I had warned her about, a boy who treated women like trophies. I begged her to stay. I told her I needed her. But Marlene brushed past me, kissed my cheek without warmth, and whispered, "You'll be fine, Mama. You always are." And just like that, she was gone. I stood in that doorway, bread burning in the oven, realizing I had spent my whole life building someone else's dream. But here's the thing no one knows. When Marlene left, she didn't just take her suitcase. She took my trust, my belief in sacrifice, my reason for living. And years later, when she returned to me with her little boy Ethan, begging me to help raise him because she couldn't do it alone, I thought, maybe this was my second chance. I didn't know then that helping raise Ethan would lead to the darkest years of my life. White right pointing backhand index. Do you want me to move forward to chapter 3, where Larai? When Marlene came back into my life, she was 27 and already worn down. Her marriage to Tom had collapsed, just like I'd predicted, and she was dragging behind her a little boy with wide grey eyes and a face too quiet for his age. "This is Ethan," she said, as if introducing a stray cat she had picked up from the side of the road. "I need your help, Mama. I can't raise him alone." I looked at him, frail, silent, clutching a toy car with chipped paint, and something inside me should have softened. Maybe a normal grandmother would have pulled him close, kissed his hair, whispered, "You're safe now." But I didn't. Instead, I smiled for Marlene, nodded, and said, "Of course, bring him here." And just like that, Ethan became part of my household. To the outside world, I was the picture of generosity. Neighbors saw me walking hand in hand with Ethan to church, dropping coins into his palm for the offering plate. At church suppers, I heaped his plate high in front of everyone, clucking proudly like a hen. People whispered, "What a good grandmother Lorraine is. Always so selfless, always so kind." But behind closed doors, the truth was different. When the neighbors left and the front door shut, my voice turned sharp. Ethan's plate emptied first to guests, and if anything was left, only then did he eat. Sometimes, I sent him to bed hungry, telling him it was good for his soul. If he broke a glass, I called him useless. If he spoke too loudly, I hissed, "Ungrateful brat." If he cried, I told him he was weak. I don't know why I treated him that way. Maybe it was the bitterness I carried from Marlene's betrayal, maybe it was the years of loneliness turning sour inside me. Or maybe Ethan's eyes, those quiet, watchful grey eyes, looked too much like the man who had abandoned me all those decades ago. Still, Ethan endured. He never yelled back, never fought. He just watched me, silent as a stone. Until one day, he finally broke that silence. He was about 8 years old, and we were sitting at the kitchen table. I had baked a pie for the neighbor's birthday, and the smell filled the room. Ethan's stomach growled loud enough to echo. I cut slices for the guests waiting outside, but I left none for him. He looked at me, steady, unblinking. Then, in the softest voice, he said, "Why do you love everyone else, Grandma, but not me?" The knife in my hand froze. No one had ever dared ask me that before, not Marlene, not the neighbors, not even myself. My heart lurched, but my pride was stronger. I slammed the pie tin shut and snarled, "Don't you dare talk back to me." Ethan's lip trembled, but he didn't cry. He simply turned his face away, and in that moment, I felt something shift, like the first crack in glass before it shatters. Because deep down, I knew this boy saw me. He saw through my smiles, through my performance for the world. He carried the truth like a secret in his small hands. And one day, I knew he would use it. By the time Ethan turned 13, the house felt like a battlefield where no shots were fired, but every breath was a wound. He had grown taller, his voice deeper, his silence heavier. He didn't whine for food anymore when I starved him. He didn't cry when I insulted him. He just sat in his room, hunched over a notebook, writing in secret. And that, somehow, unnerved me more than his tears ever did. Marlene, meanwhile, floated in and out of the picture like a ghost. She'd visit for a week, bringing promises of steady work, then disappear for months, leaving Ethan in my care. When she did show up, She never looked too closely at him. If she had, maybe she would have seen the hollows under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he reached for food. But she didn't want to see. "Thank you, Mama," she'd say breezily, kissing my cheek. "You're saving me again. You always save me." And every time she said those words, I felt the same bitter sting. Saving her had been my curse since the day she was born. Ethan and I existed in a strange performance. In public, I treated him like the apple of my eye. I made sure everyone saw me pat his back, kiss his head, serve him first at church potlucks. The community praised me endlessly. "Lorraine, you're a saint. That boy is lucky to have you." But behind closed doors, I tightened the screws. I rationed his meals. I corrected his speech until he barely spoke at all. I told him, again and again, that without me he was nothing. And yet, he never broke. That was what frightened me. One night, I caught him scribbling in that same notebook under his bedsheet, the glow of a flashlight trembling in his hands. I ripped it away, expecting doodles or nonsense. Instead, I found page after page filled with words, his words. He had written everything. The missed meals. The insults. The nights of cold silence. Even the exact phrases I had used against him, written out in careful handwriting as though he were recording evidence. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. Ethan didn't cry. He just looked at me, his jaw set. "You can tear it up," he said quietly, "but I'll just keep writing. Because someday, someone will believe me." The audacity of it stunned me. No one had ever spoken to me like that. Not Gerald, not Marlene, not anyone. My first instinct was to strike him, but something in his eyes stopped me. Those grey eyes didn't belong to a child anymore. They were sharper, older, filled with a kind of strength I couldn't crush. So instead, I tore the notebook to shreds and threw the pieces into the fire. But as the paper curled into ash, I realized a terrible truth. I hadn't destroyed his story. I had only confirmed it. And in that moment, a thought crept into my mind, unwelcome but undeniable. Ethan wasn't going to stay silent forever. One day, he would open his mouth, and when he did, the whole town would hear the truth I had buried for decades. Ethan was 17 the year the silence finally cracked. By then, he was nearly a man, broad-shouldered, sharp-featured, with those same grey eyes that had once frightened me as a child. He towered over me when he stood, but his manner remained quiet, deliberate, as though every word he spoke had been weighed in advance. We had fallen into a dangerous rhythm. In public, we played the roles perfectly, the doting grandmother and the grateful grandson. At Sunday service, he carried my coat, pulled out my chair, bowed his head at the hymns. The congregation would beam and whisper, "What a fine young man. Lorraine raised him right." But behind closed doors, the tension was unbearable. I starved him less now, not out of kindness, but out of fear. He was too strong, too aware, and I could no longer pretend he was helpless. Instead, I relied on my words, sharp as knives. "You're ungrateful. You'll never be enough. Without me, you'd have nothing." He never shouted back. He just looked at me, steady, unblinking, as though he were memorizing every syllable. And Marlene. She was barely present. She called sometimes, her voice dripping with excuses, jobs, boyfriends, bad timing. Ethan stopped asking about her. I stopped mentioning her at all. But deep down, I knew her absence was shaping him into something I hadn't expected. Someone stronger than both of us. That winter was bitter, the coldest in decades. Snow buried Maplewood in silence, and the power went out one January night. The house grew dark, the air inside as cold as the frost outside. I lit candles, sat in my rocking chair, and waited. Ethan paced the kitchen, his breath visible in the air. Finally, he turned to me, his voice steady but shaking with something I couldn't place. "Grandma, I'm done." I frowned. "Done with what?" "With your games. With the lies. With letting you treat me like I'm nothing." His fists tightened at his sides. "Everyone thinks you're an angel. But I know who you are. And soon, so will they." My blood froze colder than the air around us. This was it, the moment I had dreaded for years. I tried to laugh it off, to remind him that no one would believe a boy over his sweet, saintly grandmother. But Ethan didn't flinch. His voice rose, strong and certain. I've been writing it all down again. Every word, every day. And this time, I've kept copies. You can't burn the truth anymore. The shadows from the candlelight danced across his face, and in that moment, I saw not a boy, but a man. A man I could no longer control. And for the first time in my life, I felt fear. Because I knew Ethan was right. The truth was coming. And nothing, not my smiles, not my pies, not the lies I fed this town for decades, could stop it. The morning after that storm, the snow still lay heavy on Maplewood, burying driveways and silencing streets. But inside my chest, something heavier pressed down, the memory of Ethan's words, the certainty in his voice. He moved through the house differently now. Not timid. Not afraid. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet defiance I had no power over. He no longer asked for permission. He no longer waited for scraps. He carried himself as though he had already stepped beyond my walls. Then, one Sunday, the first crack in my mask appeared. After church, while I was greeting neighbors at the steps, I caught the sound of laughter behind me. 2 teenage boys stood with Ethan, nodding as he spoke. When I drew closer, I heard my name on his lips. "Grandma," he said when I reached him, his grey eyes meeting mine without fear. "I was just telling them about how things really are at home." A cold shiver ran through me. The boys grinned awkwardly, muttered excuses, and slipped away. But I saw it, the spark of doubt in their eyes. For the first time, someone had heard his version of the story. That evening, I cornered him in the kitchen. "What lies are you spreading?" I demanded, my voice low and sharp. Ethan didn't flinch. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, as calm as if we were discussing the weather. "They're not lies," he said. "They're the truth. And you can't stop it anymore." My hands trembled as I reached for a plate just to have something to grip. I wanted to shout, to cut him down with words, but there was something unshakable in his tone. And then, the blow I never expected came a week later. Marlene showed up. She arrived in her usual whirlwind, cheap perfume, a new coat she couldn't afford, excuses spilling from her lips. "Mama, I'm just staying a few days," she said, dropping her suitcase in the hall. "Work's been crazy." But this time, Ethan didn't shrink into the shadows when she entered. He didn't hide behind me or lower his voice. He stood tall, staring at her as if he had been waiting for this moment. And with one steady breath, he spoke. "Mom, Grandma's not who you think she is." The words fell into the room like a stone shattering glass. Marlene blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "All those years you left me here, you thought she was taking care of me. But she wasn't. She starved me. She insulted me. She hated me, and you let it happen." For the first time in decades, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Because Ethan wasn't whispering anymore. He wasn't writing in notebooks. He was speaking the truth aloud, directly to the one person who had always chosen to look away. And Marlene's face. Her smile faltered. Her brows furrowed. For just a heartbeat, I saw it, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. And I knew then, the walls I had built around my lies were beginning to crack. For a long moment, Marlene just stared at Ethan, her painted lips parted, her eyes darting between us like she was watching a play she hadn't rehearsed for. Then she laughed. A sharp, nervous sound. "Oh, Ethan, stop. Mama's always been good to you. Everyone knows it. Don't make up stories just because you're angry." Her words cut me, but not in the way she intended. She still believed me, or rather, she wanted to. I could see it in her trembling hands, the way her voice shook on the word angry. She was clinging to the version of me she had built her whole life upon. But Ethan didn't falter. His face stayed calm, but his voice carried a strength that filled the room. "I'm not angry, Mom. I'm telling you the truth. She never fed me unless other people were watching. She called me names you never heard. She smiled at strangers while I went to bed hungry. I wrote it all down, every single day." I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they could hear it. Marlene shook her head hard, as if trying to erase his words from the air. No, that's not true. Mama wouldn't, she couldn't. Then ask her, Ethan said, turning his gaze on me. The room froze. The candlelight flickered across Marlene's features, desperate, searching, needing me to deny it, to wrap her back in the warm blanket of lies I had woven for decades. But my throat locked. My mouth opened, then closed. No words came. And in that silence, I felt everything slip. Because silence can be louder than confession. And Marlene heard it. Her eyes filled with something I had never seen in her before, fear. Not of me, but of the truth she had spent her whole life avoiding. Still, she clung to her denial like a child clutching a ragged toy. She grabbed her suitcase, shoved it back toward the door. Enough, she snapped. I won't listen to this nonsense. Ethan, apologize to your grandmother. But Ethan didn't move. Didn't blink. Instead, he whispered, low but unshakable. I'm not apologizing. Not now. Not ever. The silence that followed was a silence I will never forget. Marlene's face crumpled, but not into tears, into anger. Her fury wasn't at me, nor at Ethan, but at the truth itself. She stormed out the door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled, leaving us standing in the wreckage of words that couldn't be unsaid. And that night, as the snow pressed heavy against the windows, I realized something terrifying. For years, I had controlled Ethan with silence. Now, he was controlling me with the truth. And truth spreads faster than lies. After Marlene stormed out, the house was unbearably still. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't even speak. He just went to his room, shut the door, and left me with the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would all end there. That Marlene would bury Ethan's words the way she always buried anything that didn't fit her pretty little world. But I underestimated the boy. Within weeks, whispers began trickling through Maplewood. At the market, Mrs. Rowland tilted her head when she spoke to me. Funny, she said, her voice sugar-sweet. I heard Ethan's been telling stories about feeling neglected. She laughed quickly, but her eyes lingered too long, searching for cracks. At church, I caught two women whispering near the pews, their hands cupped around their mouths. When I approached, they smiled too brightly, as though plastering wallpaper over a crumbling wall. And Ethan. He no longer hid behind me. One Wednesday, during youth group, I overheard him talking to Pastor Harris. His voice was calm, steady, every word dipped in honesty. She looks kind to everyone else, he said. But at home, it's different. At home, I'm invisible. Or worse. The pastor's face tightened, his kind eyes troubled. He laid a hand on Ethan's shoulder, and in that moment, I saw it, an ally forming. I went home that night with a sickness in my chest. For decades, I had built my reputation brick by brick, pie by pie, handshake by handshake. And now, one boy with grey eyes and a steady voice was tearing it all down. I tried harder than ever to perform. I baked more pies, hugged more children, smiled until my cheeks ached. I donated quilts to the shelter, slipped extra bills into the offering plate. And yet, people looked at me differently now. Not with admiration, but with suspicion. One afternoon, as I handed out soup at the church kitchen, a little girl tugged at my apron. Miss Lorraine, she said innocently, why does Ethan say you're mean? Her mother rushed over, scolding her, apologizing. But the damage was done. That small question was louder than any sermon, and it echoed inside me all night. Back at home, Ethan no longer cowered. He moved through the rooms like they belonged to him as much as me. He spoke less to me, more to others. And every time I saw him with that notebook, yes, another one, I felt my chest tighten. Because this time, I couldn't burn it. This time, I knew he'd hidden copies. And for the first time in 82 years, I felt the truth closing in on me like a storm I couldn't outpace. The mask I had worn so long was slipping. And Maplewood was beginning to see the face beneath. White right pointing backhand index. Do you want me to continue into chapter 9, the breaking point, Ethan fully confronting Lorraine? It happened on a Sunday. Of course it did. The church was full, the pews lined with neighbors I had fed, clothed, and fooled for decades. The organ played, the choir sang, and I sat tall, my lace gloves folded neatly on my lap, smiling the same smile that had kept me safe all these years. But Ethan wasn't sitting beside me. When I turned my head, I saw him standing near the back, next to Pastor Harris. My stomach dropped. His notebook was clutched in his hand like a weapon. The service ended, people rose to leave, and that's when Ethan's voice rang out, clear, steady, unshakable. "Wait," he said. Every head turned. The boy who had always been silent, now commanding the room. Pastor Harris laid a hand on his shoulder, giving him the floor. And then Ethan spoke the words that unraveled me. "My grandmother isn't who you think she is. She's not the woman who bakes pies and hugs children. At home, she starved me. She insulted me. She made me feel like I was nothing." I wrote it all down. Gasps rippled through the room. I rose to my feet, forcing a laugh. "Oh, he's just a troubled boy," I said sweetly. "Teenagers exaggerate. You all know me." But Ethan didn't stop. He opened the notebook and began to read. My words, my cruelty, recorded in his careful handwriting. "You're useless. You don't deserve food. You're nothing without me." Each sentence echoed off the church walls like thunder. Faces I had known for 50 years turned toward me, their eyes narrowing, their admiration crumbling into doubt. And then, I saw her. Marlene. She had slipped in late, standing in the back, arms crossed, her face pale. Her eyes darted from Ethan to me, searching, desperate for me to deny it all. But I couldn't. Because Ethan's voice, steady, strong, undeniable, was louder than any lie I could conjure. "Mama." Marlene whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me it's not true." I opened my mouth, but no words came. Only silence. And in that silence, I lost everything. The congregation I had charmed for decades. The daughter I had sacrificed my youth for. The mask I had worn like armor. All of it shattered in a single moment, under the weight of a boy's truth. I stumbled back into the pew, gripping the wood as though it could keep me standing. But nothing could hold me upright anymore. Because I knew. The whole world had finally seen me. And they would never see me the same again. After that Sunday, everything changed. The neighbors who once greeted me with smiles now turned their eyes away. At the market, no one lingered at my counter for pies. At church, pews shifted so there was always an empty space beside me. The whispers weren't whispers anymore, they were truths, spoken openly, carried on every tongue in Maplewood. For the first time in my life, I was alone. Marlene confronted me days later, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Tell me it isn't true, Mama," she begged. But I couldn't. I didn't have the strength to lie anymore. My silence was answer enough. Her tears fell heavy, but behind them was rage. "You raised me to believe you were unbreakable. You made me feel guilty for every breath I took, and now I see why. You didn't love me, you only wanted control. And you did the same to my son." Then she turned, calling out, "Ethan, come here." And Ethan stepped forward, not the frail boy I had once starved, but a man. Strong, steady, his notebook in hand like a shield of truth. He didn't look at me with hate. That would have been easier. No, he looked at me with something far worse, pity. "I'm not here to destroy you, Grandma," he said softly. "I just want the truth to be known. I want you to see what you did. And I want it to end with me." His words cut deeper than any knife. Because I realized then, he wasn't me. I had spent my life pouring cruelty into the people closest to me, letting bitterness rot everything I touched. But Ethan, he was breaking the chain. He wasn't going to pass on my cruelty. He was going to be better. And in that realization, my body crumbled. I sat in my chair, 82 years of anger collapsing into dust. My hands shook, my chest heavy with regret I could no longer bury. Ethan walked toward the door, Marlene following close behind. At the threshold, he turned once more, his voice steady but gentle. "You wanted me to be nothing. But your cruelty gave me strength. And now, I am free." The door closed behind them, and I was left in the silence I had created. For the first time, The silence wasn't power. It was punishment. And I understood, too late, the truth of my life. The kindness I gave to strangers will be forgotten. The cruelty I gave to Ethan will never be erased. That was my legacy. And it was the only one that mattered. Sparkle's ending note: instead of giving her a petty downfall, the ending leaves Lorraine with the weight of truth and regret, a poetic punishment harsher than revenge. Ethan walks away stronger, breaking the cycle, giving the audience a sense of justice and hope.